I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in April 2020 when I was 23 years old and underwent chemotherapy for a number of months. I know I was very lucky to have been introduced to onco-fertility right from the outset, and I know that this isn't the case for most patients. But I recall being at the hospital and receiving my diagnosis, and also receiving a barrage of information about all sorts of different things: biopsies, how to get a PICC line, what to expect for chemo, what to eat. And while those first few days after being diagnosed were a bit of a blur, I remember quite clearly that the doctors explained to me that the chemotherapy I would be receiving had a risk of impacting my fertility, and that they recommended that most young people, especially young people who haven't yet had children, should undergo fertility preservation. I was diagnosed with stage 4B of Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is the most advanced stage of the disease. Hodgkin's lymphoma is a cancer of the lymphatic system, and so what 4B meant was that the disease had spread past the lymphatic system into my organs. I knew that the fertility preservation process that would be most suitable for me, which was egg freezing, could take a number of weeks, and I was anxious to start chemo as soon as possible. Deciding whether to undergo onco-fertility treatment was a really big decision for me, and one that I thought really long and hard about. And being only 23 at the time, I hadn't given serious thought about whether I wanted to have children in the future, so it was pretty overwhelming to have to consider such a huge life step so quickly and decisively. Ultimately, after speaking to my doctors about whether delaying chemo would create any extra risk around the effectiveness of my treatment, I felt comfortable that they didn't think that the risk of my cancer progressing would be too negatively impacted by a few weeks' delay to complete an egg freeze. And I think what I went through would be pretty common, as I'm sure that many people who have just received the, frankly, earth-shattering news of a cancer diagnosis, particularly a late-stage diagnosis, would want to start treatment immediately. But for me, I knew that deep down, if my chemo was successful in treating my cancer and I went on to survive it, that I would want at the very least to have the option to have kids one day in the future if I decide to, and not feel like I had to make the ultimate decision there and then at the age of 23. I found the process relatively smooth once I'd committed to going forward with the egg freeze. I was a patient at the Royal Women's, and the doctors and nurses there were absolutely amazing. They were extremely patient and attentive and answered the many questions that I had. While there were a few complications that arose, such as a concern that I might not be able to receive anaesthesia due to the cancer having progressed to my lungs, the hospital were able to pair me up with the relevant specialists who were able to find ways to work around the issues. And I felt that I was in very safe and capable hands. I'm so glad that I made the decision to proceed with an egg freeze, and so grateful to the doctors that firstly flagged it as an option for me, and the doctors, nurses and medical staff that assisted me throughout the process. While it felt like a huge, overwhelming and even somewhat terrifying decision to make at the time, I have no regrets now. In many ways, I'm speaking with the benefit of hindsight because I'm very lucky to have come out of chemo strong, and I've just celebrated 2 years in remission. Perhaps my thoughts and feelings might be different had there been a different outcome. But for now, I feel so much more at ease with the idea that one day in the future, if I choose to, I can still start a family. My life since a cancer diagnosis has been, like life often is, full of wonder and amazement, but with its ups and downs. I feel extremely lucky to have gone on to graduate uni after finishing chemo, and I have an amazing partner, a supportive family, and terrific friends, and I feel very optimistic about life. I'm not sure where my life and career will take me, and so I don't really have any concrete plans to start a family at this stage, but I feel very relieved to have the insurance of fertility preservation should the time come when I do want to take the next step and start a family. Cancer shifts a lot about your perspective, about what it is to make the most of every day and not to dwell on things that you can't change. And in many ways, that's how I feel about my decision to undergo onco-fertility treatment. I made a decision then that I wasn't sure would be the best decision for me, but I followed my gut instinct and my hope that I would get through cancer and have a bright future. I'm so glad that I trusted myself and went through with it. In terms of what I'd like to see happen around public awareness of onco-fertility, I'm very keen to raise the profile of onco-fertility as an option for people who have been diagnosed with cancer. It's a shame it's not always communicated to patients as an option, when for many people, cancer can affect one of the most important things in their life, the ability to start a family. And I would like to see oncologists raising it with more people, especially young people and people of all genders, as soon as they're aware that there are risks of the patient's treatment impacting their fertility, and if the relevant onco-fertility process will not affect the effectiveness of the patient's treatment. I hope that by sharing my story, I can help people who have received a cancer diagnosis to feel confident to ask questions of their treating team, and to feel empowered to inform themselves about all the available options and the risks and benefits associated with them.